So, welcome really to the first Sport Wales Alpha Plus show and tell, and really appreciate you taking the time of what must be a very busy schedule to join us for the next hour at most. If we finish earlier, then we finish early and we can give you some time back. So since the end of Alpha as well, worthwhile to say that the show and tell has been sent more broadly beyond just Sport Wales colleagues. It's been sent to the whole of CDPS, the CDPS board and the CDPS advisory panel. Then again, if you see some faces that you might not recognize, that might be the reason why. Also, having discussed with the team and the sponsors, the show and tell as well will be available on the CDPS YouTube channel, and this will be shared within the week notes of CDPS, which go out on Monday. So you are all warned about the extent of working in the open, which is brilliant to see. And again, before even we go into the team, just to say that unfortunately we have an apologies from a member of the team that is busy working, and so hopefully will represent her as well. So without further ado, these are a couple of things that we would really like to share with you. So really, we are in what it is called now Alpha Plus, and we'll go into it and kind of what does that mean. But really in this period in between, what have you been doing? And I can assure you a fair bit. As well, you can meet all of the team that are part of Alpha Plus, as we have new members. So some members kind of unfortunately left the team, but then again, we had some others that joined, so that's great. And then again, like I was saying, we'll go into what we're trying to achieve as well with Alpha Plus, and that what does that look like. So today or during this week is really trying to give you an update of what we've been doing during Sprint 1. And really kind of as well what we've learned from some of the evaluations of the prototypes or the user research. We can as well share with you some focus on developing communications, and as well as per the previous discovery and Alpha, if you've managed to join us before as well, we tend to learn as we go along, and therefore we like to share as well what the team has learned over the last couple of weeks. And as usual, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So we have a busy schedule and I'll start. So really, what have you been doing since the end of Alpha? So if for some of you, you might remember that Alpha ended on the 13th of January, and we at that point in time were planning to start Alpha Plus towards the end of January, very early February. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and recruitment of a user researcher took longer than we expected, but happened, and we happily started Alpha Plus on the 28th of February. So in terms of some of the preparations that the team as well, or the skeleton team, shall I say, did between kind of the 13th of January and the 28th of February, was a lot around consolidating a lot of things that we've learned during Alpha. So the design team conducted a few workshops in terms of trying to understand some of the concepts in the application, as well raising and identifying some challenges in the user journey, and as well thinking already of the impact or kind of areas that might impact the back office. What we've done as well was a technique or an approach called Riskiest assumptions. So then again, this is generally used for testing ideas and hypotheses. And as always, time is a constraint. It doesn't matter what it is. And therefore, that helped us prioritize things from a product or a service perspective that we take most value to learn from an alpha before we move on to the next phase, whatever that may be. And in terms of team onboarding, so in fact, this is the third time that we're doing. And so although people might know each other separately, that doesn't mean that we know how to work or operate as a team. So it's exactly that what the team onboarding sessions are for. So one, to know each other, and some people we really didn't know that were new to the project. We then, part of it is really agree how we're going to work together and how we want to behave. So for instance, what values as a team do we hold close, like for instance, being open, respectful, or working in collaboration. As well, the team has different working patterns, so not everybody works 5 days. So then again, we have to see kind of the challenges and how we work around them, similarly to what we especially felt during Alpha. And as well, kind of the tools that would support the continued remote working and collaboration. So one of the things that we also discussed and agreed as a team is, for instance, the sprint length, so the time period of which we then have a frame to work. So you might not remember, but during discovery, we had 1 week sprint. So we were having shows and tells every week. And during Alpha, we had 2 week sprints, so basically to accommodate the type of work that we were trying to achieve as a team. From learnings from Alpha, the team decided to have 3 weeks, mainly, I think, as well, because the pace, I think, generally was felt that it was very fast, but as well trying to accommodate the fact that half of the team effectively is working only 3 days a week, so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And that obviously creates certain challenges that we have as a team have to kind of overcome and work together to make sure that we deliver what we want to deliver. And obviously, kind of, how does that work in terms of rhythm, in terms of meetings? Like, for instance, this show and tell will come and kind of share with you what we've been doing for the 3 weeks. We show you. And as well, we try to listen from you, some questions that you might have, some suggestions, whatever that may be. So you should have already all of those show and tells in your calendar for every 3 weeks. And a continuous agreement, I guess, that we continue to working in the open. So like the show and tell, like week notes that we do for our sponsors on a weekly basis, that then get kind of summarized for the CDPS week notes as well, that we continue doing blogs, for instance, and other things that we might think of. And we worked on, if you were part of, then again, previous shows and tells, you might remember that we had a canvas, so a 1-pager that summarized not only for the team, but for the sponsors and stakeholders, basically what we are trying to achieve. And Becca will touch on that in a couple of minutes. So we've been busy, I think is the short, and we've done lots of things to try and prepare and make sure that we start Alpha Plus on the best footing. And here we are. Most of the team, as I mentioned, is on the call. Unfortunately, Jack is busy working, as I mentioned. But then again, The core team for Alpha Plus followed a similar pattern in the sense that it's a multidisciplinary team, and it's made up of Sport Wales and CDPS people coming together to achieve the aims. So unfortunately, we had to say goodbye to Steph Barrow, to Owen Burgess, and to Matt Leary. But we really welcome to the team with open arms Amy, Owain and James. So Amy from Sport Wales, and she's an insight assistant that is fully part of the team and supporting with research. Owain as well is a service design officer and is fully supporting with research. And then we have James, who is our full-time now user researcher, which came out of one of the recommendations from Alpha that we really needed a full-time user researcher rather than Jack having to wear two hats during Alpha, both kind of interaction designer, which is the hat that she kept, but really in terms of releasing her to fully focus on that rather than splitting her time with user research. So that's the team, and all of them will be talking throughout this show and tell, apart from Jack. So on that note, I'll pass on to Becca.
Thanks, Maria. And for anyone who is new to the show and tells or is maybe not from Sport Wales and doesn't know who I am, I'm Becca. And for the Alpha Plus phase of the project, I have actually got myself a new hat as well, which is the product manager. So still learning the ropes with that one. But I'm going to take you through the Alpha Plus goals and our roadmap. So as Maria touched upon earlier, we produced a canvas both in Discovery and in Alpha, and it was no different in Alpha Plus, that covers off the goals that we want to achieve as a result of doing this next phase of the project. And it really came from the Alpha report that we did at the end of the Alpha phase, where we made 3 recommendations that we wanted to continue with the design and evaluation of the end-to-end user journey, and also look at how it impacts on back office processes and system requirements. So that's what we were doing during Alpha. And then 2 other things that came up as recommendations were going to be looked at separately to Alpha Plus, which was the procurement and implementation of a new grant system, as well as any tactical changes that we could make in the interim to our current system. So in terms of the Alpha Plus, the main goal of it is to look at that design and evaluation of the end-to-end user journey. So we're going to continue with that and how it impacts on the back office processes and system requirements. So in terms of the goals, we'll be evaluating an end-to-end application process, also identifying the impact from the front end, the application side, on our back office, as well as identifying the impact from the front end on the requirements for any new system, and then also looking at any policy changes that might come out of the Alpha Plus as well. So as I've said before, Alpha Plus, and as Maria said before, Alpha Plus is an extension of the Alpha, but it's really looking at just getting even more in-depth into the testing and evaluation with participants, the end-to-end user journey and how that looks and the impact it has on the rest of the investments. If we move to the next screen, so this is the Alpha Plus roadmap. As you can see, it's broken down into the 3-week sprints. So we've got 5 of them. The last sprint 5 is for 2 weeks. But across those each sprints, we'll be doing the same thing pretty much for each of them, which is planning for the recruitment of the participants that we want to test the prototype with, and then obviously building, testing, iterating all works goes on in the background at the same time before then putting it in front of users to test it with them. And we'll be doing that across the sprints, and then obviously at the end, as with the previous Discovery and Alpha, there'll be time for analysis, synthesis of our findings, and then playing that back to our sponsors and stakeholders as part of a end of Alpha Plus report. And then I think I'm handing over to Lorena.
Thanks very much, Becca. As well as setting goals for Alpha Plus, we always set a focus goal at the start of a sprint, one more. We learned a lot through Alpha, and we felt that our first job was to make sure that we captured what we'd learned, that we acted on it, and that we tested it with users. We also had some new ideas which were based on our learnings, and some areas that we hadn't delved into yet. So our single focus goal for Sprint 1 has been designing and testing the last iteration of Alpha, emphasising some things that come up in new user journey and how those come across, and also looking at the contributions, declaration and consent end of the flow. Next slide, please. Now, this is going to look familiar to those of you who attended Show and Tell in Alpha. What it does is to show the user journey and, in a way, the relative size of each stage within that journey. So what I just described in the focus was stuff that sits in either eligibility and onboarding or apply. For Alpha Plus, what we're aiming to do is to encapsulate the majority of the user-facing interactions. So that's eligibility, the application process, and then offer and acceptance with all the various subspecies of offers and related activities that sit within that. Next slide, please. So what did we do in Sprint 1? Well, recruitment. We recruited users that we could evaluate the prototype with. I think there might be a little bit more about that later on. The design team designed and built what we're calling Prototype 1 for Alpha Plus, but which is really an iteration of what we had done during Alpha. We also iterated the iteration after day 1 of our evaluations. There were some things that we learned, some things that we thought perhaps were obvious improvements we could make, and others that were things that we wanted to test with a couple new people. And in fact, we ended up researching with 5 participants. Our aim was 6, 3 per day, but I think there was a little bit of a communication, what does tomorrow mean kind of breakdown. So we lost 1. Following that, other parts of the team analysed everything that went on, all of the notes that were taken by members of the team during those evaluations, the videos, and synthesise those into some findings which were then presented at the beginning of this week to the whole team. We've also been, of course, preparing for this, the show and tell, and a little while after the show and tell today, we'll be holding our first retro of Alpha Plus, which is where the team comes together and looks at what happened in the sprint, what went well, what didn't go so well, what could we do differently or improve. We've also spent a little bit of time this week with some preliminary conversations, preparing for what we're going to be doing in Sprint 2, maybe sizing up the kind of work, looking at the priorities that our product manager, Becca, has, and how those will play out. And last but not least, in Sprint 1, we welcomed Julio to the team. Julio's from CDPS, he's an Agile Comms lead, and that's all I'm going to say because I'm sure he's going to say something about himself shortly. So now I'll pass over to Owain.
Cheers, Lorena. Put on that, bawb. So yeah, on the screen at the minute, you can see screenshots of the prototype. And as Lorena mentioned, there's been a fair bit of design and iteration of the prototype since Alpha. But these are just some of the examples of areas we wanted to focus in on during the evaluations last week. So some of it's around the contributions, task list, and sort of funding summaries. But what I'll do now is walk you through the prototype. So if Maria can stop sharing, I'll try and screen share and I'll try and guide you through what we showed them last week during the sessions. So bear with. Hopefully that's on screen. Perhaps Maria, you put Lorena, give me a nod if it's on. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, last week we had 5 sessions, as Lorena mentioned, 4 of which was done through Teams, as we've done with the majority of the evaluation sessions previously. But we also had 1 in-person session. So one participant came back and said they struggled a bit digitally. So yeah, we brought them into the office and had a bit of an in-person session with them. And that gave another perspective again on their sort of take on things, because it was a bit more of a relaxed environment for them. We just watched them doing it, and we shared the screen with the others who weren't in the room. But that was another way of seeing it happen. So I'll walk you through the pages now, conscious that during alpha some of these would have already been covered a little bit, so I won't dwell on it too much. But I'll just talk you through some of the key things we wanted to ask participants last week during the session. So the first page that came through to was this, when they started the evaluation, and we just wanted to understand, I guess, if the information on this page was what they expected to see at the start point before they went into starting the application properly. Is anything missing? Any of these terms, are they sort of unexpected? Do they not understand any of it? So maybe some of the goals here, are they familiar with this? The concept of a project, is that something that they could easily identify with? Do they know exactly where it starts and finishes? And some of the elements down here about keeping a record of a learning log, are they familiar with that? Are they not, etc. Should point out that the evaluation sessions were conducted with people who had applied for grants before, so perhaps they were a bit more in tune with this. But yeah, this was some of the things we asked them during that first page, and they went on to kick off with an application. So on this page, we sort of tried to understand from them, did they know what we were trying to do with this page? What was it about? Did they expect to see this right at the start point of starting the journey? Yeah, it all make sense to them, I suppose, about what we were trying to achieve on this page. And again, questions around some of how easy it is for them to understand what we're trying to get out of them here. Has the project started? Some of them weren't sure about that, but we were trying to just gauge where they were at with how easy they could go through this page before going on to insert what sport or activity they were referring to. So it was quite a quick one, this page. And then they came on to provide a bit more information because they were eligible if they selected the right boxes in the previous page. And again, just trying to drill in a bit into, did they expect to see this information on this page? Is it useful? We're talking about some of the things that we'd be asking for further on in the line in this application process, and just understanding, yeah, is this what they expect to see at this point? We talked about the bank account details. Do they expect to be asked about a bank account during the process? 20 days to determine the decision about the application, what their thoughts were on that. And it was just that type of thing we need to get a feel for, yeah, what they thought about what we're asking them, and the level of information that's available to them here. So this was a bit of a new page that we tried to sort of focus in on a bit to try and gauge what they thought this was for. So it's a bit of a task list, we called it, and we wanted to see whether they were familiar with seeing this, and especially at this point in the application. So it's showing here subcategories or subheadings, I suppose, of the journey. Did they expect to see this? Are they familiar with what these titles actually refer to? Did they know what these grey boxes were about? Did they expect to be able to do anything else on this page, or just to see what's coming up during the application process? So this was a bit of a new one, and we chatted around that. And this first one here on manage your application, we asked them what they think would come and what that meant, and what would they need to be covering during that part of the application. So yeah, there's a bit of chat there on this page, depending on what the participant wanted to refer to. And there was different levels of understanding really here. So then it came onto this manage your application page, and yeah, we wanted to get a feel for whether that actually made sense to them, because there was, again, a bit of confusion for some people around what this page was for, why we were asking for a project name, and then yeah, why they thought that was there for, I suppose, given that they'd come straight into this first page of the application. Then there was a few more easier questions, and then we talked to them a bit about this bit. So personal information, how quick they were flying through this part, were they actually stopping to read it? Yeah, would they usually, what's their normal habits around reading terms and conditions and terms of use? So there's a bit of prompting around that and what the behaviours were on this page. So then they needed to tick that to go into the next page. So this one was more about the organisation, but we wanted to make sure that they understood what this was about. Yeah, what level of detail were they expecting to put in here, and just a little bit about the preferred communication method. So I think you would have seen a bit of this during the alpha screenshots anyway, so there wasn't nothing new to show you here. Again, so there's a little bit of confusion sometimes around the address. We wanted to understand what address they were meant to put in here, what they thought that it needed to be. Sometimes some clubs don't have a clubhouse, it's just a field. Is there a secretary? So we were trying to get an understanding of how comfortable, how quick could they respond to this bit here around knowing what address details that they need to be putting in. And the bank account, were they familiar with that? Do they need to go and speak to someone else about it? Were they ready to sort of answer these questions, and were they expecting them, I suppose? Then this last bit, people had sort of different understandings of. So it asks about the organisation sections and participants. We just asked them to sort of talk us through how they'd go and approach this type of question. Some were just merely saying how many members they had in their club. Some were talking more about the legal constitution of the club. Others were breaking down into sort of the levels of the leagues they participate in, how many teams they've got, how many players are part of each one. So there was different levels of understanding, and people were sort of going about answering it in more detail than others. So it was to get a feel for how they'd go about that, and were they sort of familiar with the terminology involved here. So this is about the project itself. We wanted to understand here about would they be able to easily tell us the sort of the timings around the project, and they had some questions back to us, or they had different sort of perspectives on that, whether really around the concept of project and project timing. Is it about when they start to get quotes for the project, or is it about when they get the funding, or when it actually starts being installed on site? So there was different levels of understanding there, and that's what we wanted to get from that. So affiliation to a national governing body, they needed to answer this, and then I asked them whether they'd contact their NGB about the application. So some would, some weren't sure. We'd ask them why, and ask them why they thought we were asking about this. And again, some thought it was just about funding, some had different understanding about why we'd asked such a question. So it was sort of drilling into some of their perspective around that. So this one is about the location of the project. Up here in this sort of gap, it would have dragged across the name of the project from earlier on in the application. I've inserted it here. Again, really understanding from them, if the project was run over a few locations, how easily could they use the functionality of this page to sort of explain that? Did they think it was the actual location of the project, or did they think it was to do with the location of their club, or the clubhouse, etc.? So it was understanding here how quickly they could answer that, and do they need to sort of stop and think about it, or was it straightforward? Then, similar to the NGB question, we'd ask if they've spoken to their local authority. We've specified here, we made a bit of a change since Alpha, saying local authority sports development team rather than just local authority, because there was some confusion before about why they need to speak to local authority about a project for their club. And then again, talking around some of that. So this is one we sort of learnt about during the evaluation last week, where originally there was just one box for this question, and it just asked about why will the project make a difference. And then we learnt that, well, some of the feedback was, well, you haven't even asked us to sort of insert information about what the project is first, so can we not do that first? So we learnt a little bit from the first day, and then split it into two questions then by the second day. And the sort of responses were a bit more positive the next day. They could sort of break down the information about the project first, and then go in to talk about the funding and why it would make a difference. So it seemed to help them break down their answers a bit better. So we learned ourselves on the first day from the feedback, and then sort of responded accordingly with sort of two boxes for this page. And again, we just talked about how they'd go about answering those questions there, and how easy they'd be able to do that. And whether they do it themselves, or they'd go away, they'd come back and do it, or speak to others in the club and add information. So this is a bit more of one we focused on doing the evaluations last week. It's a newer page with a bit more emphasis on the contributions element. So for us, we were keen to sort of understand how familiar the applicants would be around contributions. It talks here about if it's more than £10,000 in value, they need to do a 10% contribution. Did they know about that already? Were they expecting to see it? How easy could they respond to these sections here? And how much sense did that make to them? Because of this sort of new information we added to the prototype. So they'd select here where that contribution would come from, whether it was their own or from other sources. And then they'd also need to categorise what type of funding they're looking for, what's it for, equipment, people development, etc. And again, looking how quick they could fit their sort of project into one of these boxes or not. And then they need to go on and add some detail around the equipment. So the functionality, this was something we looked at, how easy could they use it. So they'd look here and they'd type in the details of an item, perhaps kit. Cost per item, could put 10 here, 50, and then it'd calculate it for them. But what we wanted to see was, could they relate the previous page to this one? So it says equipment here, that's because they selected equipment in the last one. Could they make the link? And how easy could they use the functionality of this page around the sort of funding they needed for that equipment? Then again, we focus in on this new sort of functionality around contributions. Yeah, were they ready to answer these questions? Could they do that themselves? Would they be looking to use the treasurer or someone else in the club to help them here? And how good was this tool in helping them to insert the relevant information to the application? They needed to add whether it was confirmed or unconfirmed contributions, and then they'd insert it here. So I'm just adding some examples for you. And then this page just sort of demonstrated, yeah, a bit of a breakdown of the contributions and the total funding they're looking to apply for. Try to see how useful this was for them. Did they expect to see it? Did they not? And some made comparisons to the current system they've used, and sort of like this one, I suppose, as a nice summary for them towards the end of the application. Conscious of time, so we're just coming to the end of the walkthrough. We wanted to focus in a bit here around declaration, terms of use, and understanding whether they expected to see this information here. Would they stop and click on some of the links here? What's their behaviour on this page? And are they familiar with the declaration? Do they know what they're actually declaring here? And we talked about that with them as they came to the end of their application. So I'll just take these. Then they went on to submit it. And we talked here about, is this what they expected to see on the last page? Is there any other information missing from what they would have normally seen perhaps here, or what they expected to see? What else could they do with the page? What their thoughts were on these functions on the bottom, view application. Does that mean they could go back in and edit things, or just simply a read and print job? And would they go and download it? And how would they use these pages, I suppose? And yeah, we just generally talked about how easy was the process for them on the end here. And that's a quick run through of the prototype we showed to them last week. So I'll now stop sharing. And I'm not sure who's next. Well, Maria will go onto the page. I think it's James.
Me next.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm the user researcher, the new user researcher on the team. So this part, there's a couple of slides of information that we gathered from what Owain's just been through at a higher level. Some stuff is a summary of what Owain's just said, and then other stuff is more conceptual findings. So this first part, just again, caveats, we're just sharing highlights here. There's a lot more depth. If anybody wants any more depth, happy to go through it with them or answer any questions as well. And then again, the other caveat was that participants were people who've already applied before, so that did have an impact on some of the dynamics of the findings and how we interpret them. However, those people will potentially use the new service in the future, so they are still going to be users, but it did impact this a little bit. But yeah, the long and short of it is that people are getting through the journey with no major blockers. That's the biggest thing about this. The things that we're finding, that there are interesting things to find, there are things to maybe change and improvements to make and refinements. Things that the designers already know about, maybe a few surprises here and there, but mostly then nobody's flipping their desk in anger or anything like that and getting completely stuck. They're getting through it, which is great. Again, the majority stated at the end of it as well that it was clear, easier and better than the current process. Again, they were comparing it to the previous one, naturally doing so, of course. So the idea for the next rounds, by the way, on that point, is that we hopefully try and get to speak to some people who have never done this before. They may have done funding before and offer funding elsewhere, but hopefully they would never have done this before, so we can get a completely different perspective. Yeah, and a shout out for the task list, which was a brand new idea in this round, and it worked really well in placing people where they were in the journey. They completely understood that they would be sections for them to do, to come in and out of, to go back to save it, and that gave them confidence as well, which was a really good outcome there. There was a little bit of confusion about one of the titles, one of the sections that I think we're going to be working through, but other than that, a really good part of the process. The contributions was mostly understood, as Owain talked about as well, so that was a good outcome. And declaration and consent was used as you would expect from that kind of page and those kind of tick boxes and that kind of behavior from a user experience perspective. And the funding summary of the page where it had all the numbers on was completely flawless. Everybody loved that layout and really understood it clearly straight away and understood its importance. But from my perspective only, this is not what anybody else has said, but that there may be some benefit into testing that down the line with actual real data, because as soon as real money's in there, it might make a little bit of a difference on how they perceive that information. So that's something for the future. Next slide, please. So this is a bit more interesting, meatier stuff around. Obviously, it's going well, so that was just to get that part in. But these are some of the other points that we looked at. Some at a more conceptual level, some at a lower level. But so the top one there, you can see that some users were concerned that we weren't asking them enough information. So we talked to them about this when they got closer to the end and at the end. Again, they were comparing it to the current process, but it kind of caused them to expect maybe another step after this step, and to mop up what hadn't been given. So things like uploading documents and some other pieces of information they're used to giving. And then there was also a slight concern from a couple of people about like, oh, it might be a no then. I might get rejected because I haven't given enough. And who knows, that might cause them to pick up the phone or something like that. So that was something to consider. And Becca, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that first point as well.
Yeah, I think that was really an interesting finding from the evaluations, that they, from the previous phases, we'd heard that the desire from applicants was to have a shorter, simpler application process. And then when you put that in front of them, especially if they are quite well versed in our current system and what is currently asked, there was that hesitancy to be like, well, it's not exactly as it currently is. What am I going to trip over here by not giving enough information? So it's definitely given us food for thought in terms of like the communications work that will have to go on around launching any type of new grant or system to applicants, to kind of bring them along the journey of, we've looked at things to change, we've tried to improve and simplify the process, and so you might see some changes that you don't ask as much information and what have you. So that's going to have to be really built into the process as well, is the communication to everyone. Yeah. I see a thumbs up from someone. I'm not sure who that's from, but thank you.
And also, though, that is a great finding for this type of user to take into the next rounds with brand new users. So we wouldn't be asking them directly how they feel about that, but we'll definitely be having a lot more focus on that when it comes to them, to see what they think about the amount of information. They may have done other funding, for example, so we'll definitely keep a keen eye on that. The second one, project as a term, confused all of the users really about, and they had to make assumptions about what it meant with varying degrees of description. So it did have an impact on later stages of the process. So when it came to the project timing of when does it start, when does it end, because they couldn't necessarily define what a project was very well, it then impacted on, I don't know when things are going to start and end, because I don't really know what a project is. So some of the examples are, one person said it was just a one-off, or an emergency situation. Another person said it's just a one-off if you just need a light putting up. Someone else talked about it from their perspective, that like, oh, it's the project that's within a big scheme of things that we're doing. So there was a few different perceptions of what project should mean to them, which was a good thing to learn about. Becca, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that as well.
Yeah, it's just to that was interesting learning, especially from a Sport Wales perspective, and someone that has been involved in the grants for number of years, and we've always referred to as things as projects, maybe not so explicitly in recent years with COVID, but it's something to bear in mind for us going forward of, you know, the language that we're using. It's, at least in the evaluations that we've had, maybe not resonated in the way that we expect it to in terms of what we as Sport Wales deem a project. So it's something that we're going to consider going through the rest of the evaluations as well. I can see that Paul asked the question, did they offer any alternatives? I don't think the question was raised to them about alternatives for that. I know that they were asked about alternatives for something else, but I'm not sure if they said about project. Not sure whether James or Owen and Amy, who were involved in the evaluations, can remember anything specifically that was maybe suggested.
I just repeat that part again, Becca, sorry, I was...
Just that Paul has raised the question in the chat about did they suggest any alternatives to the term project, I'm guessing, and I'm not sure if there was anything that came through from them. No,
we didn't redirect the questioning in terms of what would you call it then yet. We just wanted to understand how they perceived the concept of it, essentially. So that might come down the line for sure. So I'm going to get through these next few pretty quickly if we can. It was suggested that there was not enough emphasis on exactly what you'll need up front. And I think this was already in the design team's head as well, about iterating towards that before giving them too much straight away. So there was a desire from a few people to say, tell me just exactly what I need to do so that I don't end up getting halfway through and bouncing in and out all of the time. Again, comparison to the current process, but it's a very fundamental design principle that you make sure everybody knows what they're going to need to do. And then the asking people why they would need, so the page that had the about and the why do you need to do it, for example, confuse people in a way that one of the comments that you can see there, buying lights should be obvious as to why I need them. And then another person felt a bit pressured by this part and they would really take it away, talk to lots of other people and go in and out numerous times to get it right because they were afraid that they would get it wrong because it was maybe perceived as a right or wrong, correct, incorrect thing. And then others have said that they would, you know, literally copy and paste from the goals and then rejig it to make sure it matched what the goals said. Becca, again, I'll normally reach out to you. I'll finish this last one, and then if you want to summarize the last two. And it was just mentioned by one user, again, completely not prompted. It just came out naturally for them by the end, that an expression of interest with conversations with Sport Wales to help describe what they want to do and why they would want to do it, they felt would be beneficial. So get the eligibility in the bag. Have that up front, sorry, and talk to the people, set up the project, set up the idea of what it is you need to do, then do the eligibility, and then go and do the rest of the application process, which kind of links to the why, Becca, doesn't it? So I'll just hand over to you quickly for that.
Yeah, it does link to the why, and also it links back to some of the findings that we had during Alpha as well. It was similar things that they were struggling with. So even with iterations and things like that, there's still work to be done in trying to convey what it is that we need to the applicants, and in a way that they can, I suppose, convey it back to us as to what it is that they're trying to do. In terms of the expression of interest, I know that's something that we've kind of discussed internally as a team, because it was something that we previously had and we had good success with it. So it's good to see that there's some desire potentially from applicants to have something similar again. So it's something that, you know, we'll be looking at, maybe not necessarily as part of Alpha Plus, because our scope is quite constricted to the time that we have, but it's something that, you know, I'll definitely take back to my team as maybe a next step in a process that we'd maybe want to explore a bit more as well. Yeah. Just to go, oh sorry James, I was just going to say, just to go back to the comments, just that Lorena had popped something in there from the previous points about the projects, and yeah, it's maybe not so much about replacing the word, but trying to convey the concept of what we mean by a project, be it's called something else, but you know, it's getting the concept across to them as well. Yeah, and just to caveat all of that, just because we spoke about them and somebody said it doesn't mean we're just going to knee-jerk react and design something against that. These are all things to start thinking about and doing, like Becca said, into the future, basically. Quickly hand over to Owain as well for a few quotes from users.
Yeah, cheers, James. So yeah, these sort of follow on from the previous bullet pointed slide, really. So positive one to start off with. It holds your hand all the way through and it's very user friendly. So yeah, I think it's just a positive comment. And generally at the end of the 5 evaluation sessions, even if they've had some comments or queries during the session on the end, yeah, they were pretty positive about the functionality of it and how easy they could get through it. So yeah, a positive one to start off with. Next one, please. I think this was just talked about on the end of the bullet pointed slide, but I think a pre-application discussion would be far better, someone to talk to find out if we're eligible or not. So yeah, I think it's just been covered, but someone mentioned that as an alternative means of, yeah, sort of having that pre-application discussion with a person rather than just using that application process. So cheers, Maria. This one is in relation to the question about why, or the justification, why would they need funding? So there's three different stories here really. Is it to describe what will happen if we don't and the impact it will have? So that was one person's sort of viewpoint on that. Then I would have read the guidance before this and adapted that and played the game basically just to get the lights. This happens all the time. So I suppose it's experience here, someone who's done it in the past, and yeah, telling us really that they would use that sort of previous application or previous knowledge and go about it that way. And then the last one, sorry, there was one more on the bottom there, in the previous one. I could go in and out about 20 times before I go to a submission point. So just talking about the fact that they would need to go and speak to colleagues or speak to others in the club or the committee, or even just check it themselves a lot. So yeah, there's different perspectives on how people would go and respond to that question, depending on who they are and what club they're from. Cheers, Maria. And yeah, this one has been covered a little bit by now, but the project of the term. I've seen this question before, I find it confusing. We haven't replaced it, so this one's talking about a replacement of a lawnmower, but we have estimates. So at what point does the project start? So yeah, just follows on from what we've just been talking about around the project term. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I've just joined the Alpha Plus team to support with communications. I'm just going to keep it quite short. I think it's been a great presentation so far. My role is to help both the Alpha Plus team and obviously work with yourselves in Sport Wales with regards to the communications. And just a bit of background, what I've done, it's been 10 days, less than 10 days actually, since joining. So I've been very much working at pace, and some of the initial things that I've been able to do and to achieve is, well, firstly, obviously meet with the Alpha Plus team and learn about the project and equally the outcome and the service that is being designed and the value that wishes to be added there for Sports Wales and obviously for community groups and clubs throughout Wales. I've had a great pleasure of meeting and chatting with Paul within the communications team at Sport Wales. So thank you very much for all the insight that you shared there, Paul. And from all that, one of the deliverables that I have is to draft some messaging and some communications, but very much make it into a collaborative approach. This is not just us, but this is kind of CDPS and Sport Wales kind of working together to make sure that both internally and externally we can kind of raise awareness both of the service that's being designed and the value that this service aims to deliver there. So there's going to be quite a bit of work. Please feel free to get in touch with myself if you do got any questions. Paul, it's been fantastic, and I'll be sending a few drafts to you as well. I think the team here, and thanks to Maria for kind of guiding me through all the various questions I've had. But that's certainly what I'll be aiming to do. So I'm going to pass on, but I'm not sure who to now.
In fact, it's to me, so thanks, Julio. And so as per previous show and tells, we learn a lot as a team, and we can quickly share some of the learnings that we had over the last couple of weeks. So the first one is all about the team. You're probably aware of the team or location, where I took that from. But it's really a reminder, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, that, when you start something, although you know the people, you should absolutely spend that time to come together as a team and agree how you're going to work together. The next one is around kind of the recruitment approach and the fact that during both Discovery and Alpha, the recruitment emails to participants came from Sport Wales, and therefore we continued with that and continued again to have really good response from participants to be part of the research that we're conducting. On to Becca now.
Thank you. So this was touched upon slightly by Lorena at the beginning of the session, but one of our learnings was to be specific when it comes to talking with our evaluation participants. So as was said, we did have a last-minute cancellation for the evaluations, and I think there was possibly some confusion in terms of when we're referring to the session. An email was sent that said about tomorrow's session, but it unfortunately wasn't read until the day of. So I think there was some confusion on the applicant's part, obviously, as when we were intending to speak to them. So we've just learned that we need to be as specific as possible, put dates in, so that there's no confusion in the future. And I think to Lorena now.
Yeah. So we learned that technical challenges come from every direction. Our experience in Alpha was that a lot of people struggled to come to terms with Teams, sharing screens or all kinds of things. So we prepared a guide for Alpha Plus that helped those people who are unfamiliar to do those things, which was fine. But when one participant, completely versed in Teams, came to do an evaluation, he discovered that his own company's firewall wouldn't let him join the session. Now, we found a way to work around that. He issued an invitation from his own company Teams, but it did mean that only those people on the Sport Wales domain were, for some reason, permitted in through the firewall. So Owen and Amy did a sterling job of dealing with that issue, but half the team was unable to observe the session. So next time, I think we'll add to the list of things that we check in advance, firewalls. And we're also looking at the option of setting up a quick technology trial with people just to make sure that we can minimise the potential for disruption on the day. Following on from that, there's absolutely no substitute for observing research firsthand. As I said, Owen and Amy did a fabulous job. And afterwards, Amy gave us a brilliant summary of that session. She not only told us what she observed, she began to pull it together to give it some context and some insight. But it's nevertheless not the same as watching what the user is saying and what they're doing in person. So I would say, I always say this when we talk about research sessions, if you get a chance, if you're invited to observe research anywhere with users, then take it, because you really do learn so much more watching people trying to use your services. And finally, just before we ask if you have any questions for us, we've got a couple for you. Did this show and tell do what you needed it to do? Is there anything you would like us to do differently next time? Do you have any suggestions? There's absolutely no need to answer now, and I think we're getting quite short on time. But if you want to pop anything in the comments, or if you want to ping off an email to Maria, then absolutely, we'd be really grateful to hear your suggestions. So now, over to you. Do you have any questions? No questions?
I think we covered off all the questions in the chat as well, so I think that's been covered off throughout. So,
all right. Then Maria, do you want to close us down?
Yes, I absolutely can. Just again to say a very big thank you for joining us, for your comments in the chat, for your participation. So then again, like Lorena mentioned, if you have any questions, do email me. If you know my email, it's a long one from CDPS, but then again, I can add that on the chat, or you can send it to info@digitalpublicservices.gov.wales, or then again, you can send to Becca if you are from Sport Wales. Then again, hopefully, Becca, maybe we can add your email as well on the chat. And so people have a couple of opportunities to kind of give their feedback or thoughts. I'm just going to pause that for a few seconds if anyone has any more questions, thoughts. If not, thank you again, and see you in 3 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Thank you.